Anzac Day, the uniquely Australian day which symbolises the sacrifice that made the Anzac legend a foundation stone of the Australian identity. Each April 25th, crowds gather at Gallipoli to remember the troops who fought and fell in 1915. Their country's first battle of the bloodbath that was World War I. But the Anzac legend began at Gallipoli. The diggers' true worth was forged on the Western Front. They became one of the crack fighting corps of the British Army. While making up only 5% of the Allied forces, they played a crucial role in winning the war to end all wars. If the Anzacs were remarkable, so was their leader. General John Monash would become one of the most famous Australians of his era. He was the first commander to be knighted in the field by a British king in 200 years. But for all his brilliance, Monash had to fight his way to the top.
Prime Minister, I will not voluntarily forego this command.
With respect, Sir, Monash he's Jewish. And as a race, they do tend to be pushy. It's their natural trait.
But there was no doubting Monash's commitment to his men.
It's madness. It's bloody madness. It's a waste of lives.
Off the battlefield, Monash's dangerous liaisons would also affect his career.
And the king?
I had 5 minutes with the king and over 10 minutes with the queen.
And what about that dreary son of theirs?
The Prince of Wales to you, you wicked woman.
Such was his impact that when Monash died, more than 300,000 people lined the streets for the biggest funeral ever seen in Australia. Monash had achieved something far more enduring than success on the Western Front. He had helped to create a legend.
It is a memorial to the diggers. And that alone.
When World War I was declared, Australians to be in it. Men rushed to enlist. As a young country, Australia was eager to prove its worth.
Australia was deeply loyal to England, incredibly proud of the empire. When war came, they were excited about it, intensely enthusiastic and certain that it would be brief, it would be short, and that the empire would be remarkably victorious. And wouldn't it be a pity if it was all over before the Australians had the time to get there?
49-year-old John Monash had waited all his life for a chance like this. Although he was Australian-born, his parents were German, and but his wife Vic and daughter Bertha knew exactly where he stood.
I think that every man who can must help the empire to crush a peril which ultimately threatens the existence of Australia as a free country.
Like most of the Australian military of the time, Monash was a part-time soldier. Professionally, he was an engineer. He'd made his name building bridges, staring down the tough times of the 1890s depression to build a successful business.
More tea, Auntie?
When war was declared, Monash was given the 5,000-strong 4th Brigade. He had to argue hard to get it, given his German-Jewish background.
Well, Punch says that I'm stout and ruddy with a typical Hebrew mouth and Hebrew eye.
Zum Himmel, ist ein jüdisches Auge?
Auntie, I want you to promise me that you won't speak German in public.
I have lived here for 40 years.
It doesn't matter. We are at war with Germany.
And Auntie, it probably would be better if you didn't visit us while John's away. For Bertha's sake. Just until John returns.
For many years, Monash and Vic had not always seen eye to eye. But Monash's personal life would always have its complications. As Monash prepared to leave, trench lines were snaking across Europe. Within weeks, both sides would find themselves hopelessly bogged down in a lethal stalemate. Desperation to break out and find a second led to one of the Great War's early disasters, Gallipoli.
We went up the valley under a hail of shrapnel and in a chorus of whistling and crackling bullets. The men behaved like heroes. Their battle discipline is perfect.
Monash commanded the 4th Brigade at the head of Monash Valley, which was the most critical part of the Anzac position. They held the position, the Turks never broke through.
But Monash didn't just fight. He wanted recognition for himself and his men. It would lead to an early showdown with Charles Bean, Australia's official war correspondent.
I've got a bone to pick with you.
And what's that?
I don't think the 4th Brigade is getting its fair share of press coverage, do you?
In my defence, General, if I single out one brigade, all the others will want their turn.
As they should. So they can start with the 4th. No brigade has had such a continuously hard time of it as mine. Wouldn't you agree?
I'm a correspondent, not a peddler of advertisements.
All I want is fair recognition of my men's sacrifice. Or is that too much to ask?
Bean dismissed Monash as a showy self-promoter, just out for himself. He would become Monash's most determined critic.
You don't hide your light under a bushel. Nor do you fail to keep an eye to the future.
Monash said he always wanted his men to have the runs on the board. He wanted their achievements to be widely publicised. Now that is going to rub off on him, that's true, and he will benefit from that, but it also does wonders for their morale and it gives them an incentive to keep performing at very high levels.
When the Anzacs finally withdrew from Gallipoli in December 1915, they were deeply disillusioned with their British commanders.
The whole thing was a rotten and badly organised show. Insufficient troops, inadequate munitions, attempting more than was possible with the means available.
For Monash, Gallipoli had been a searing experience. Bad planning had wasted lives and ended in failure. He'd learnt that those in command didn't always know best. Back home, Australians were stunned. The 8,000 dead from Gallipoli led to a collective outpouring of grief. The days of public enthusiasm for the war were over.
It's hard to explain, isn't it, how people could send young men off to war and expect that everything would be just a romp. In the beginning, there was simply no expectation that the war would cause such grief and such devastation in the families and homes of Australia.
The Monash family was also facing a crisis. Vic had been diagnosed with cancer of the uterus. Monash was determined to return home. Refused leave by his superiors, he was on the verge of throwing away his career and going anyway.
Oh, you're looking much better this morning.
I suppose we should send your father a cable. Put his mind at rest.
Vic's cable arrived in the nick of time. Monash's career now took a dramatic turn. In June 1916, he was promoted to command the newly formed 3rd Division of more than 20,000 men. The 3rd was one of 5 divisions making up Australia's commitment to the war in Europe. Mindful of Gallipoli and its mistakes, Monash trained his men hard. He also studied reports on the trench warfare on the Western Front. This was a new kind of war, needing new tactics. As Monash's troops improved, they began to attract attention, all the way up to the king.
Now, they reviewed the troops, and you've got 27,000 troops. That takes 2.5 hours, and they were having a conversation.
Are you sure you have enough overcoats?
Yes, Your Majesty, and they have waterproof capes as well.
Good.
The king is a bit of a prattler, but there was method in the way he prattled on. He wanted to see what Monash was made of.
You met my son in Egypt, I believe.
Yes, I did have that pleasure.
He was very complimentary about you Australians, despite all the problems at Gallipoli. What exactly did we do wrong there, in your opinion?
Well, the terrain was against us. The enemy knew we were coming. I'm afraid some of the planning was inadequate.
If we win this war...
If we win.
And then the king, for some reason, then said, if we win the war, and Monash cut him dead. Without a beg pardon, Your Majesty, how would he react to that?
Yes, we'll win, all right. Nobody need make any mistake about that. Germany started out to smash the British Empire, and look. Just look. See what they've done. They've made an empire of us.
As Monash prepared to leave for the Western Front, the war had been going for 2 long years. Trenches ran all the way from Switzerland to the Belgian coast. Military leaders were still groping for answers. The Allies had suffered enormous casualties. Over 20,000 dead in one day during the infamous Battle of the Somme. Monash's division was nicknamed the Deep Thinkers by the battle-hardened Australian soldiers who'd been doing all the fighting and dying.
There was animosity, hostility towards the 3rd Division on the part of the other divisions, and that was manifested in nicknames such as the Neutrals, or those bludgers in the 3rd Division are still deciding whether they're going to declare war or not, hence the Deep Thinkers. That meant that it was very important that the 3rd Division distinguish itself in its first big battle to prove that it could stand alongside the others, that it was as good as the others, and to dispel their hostility towards it. It's fortunate in many respects that the 3rd Division's first big battle was at Messines.
Messines was a heavily fortified ridge. Taking it was essential for a future attack on Passchendaele. Monash's 3rd Division was one of 12 Allied divisions that would take part. 220,000 men would attack the ridge at various points. If the Allies could take Passchendaele, the way was open to the Belgian ports and a quicker end to the war. For his first battle on the Western Front, himself into an unprecedented level of detailed planning. To communicate with his troops, he built a large-scale model of the battlefield to familiarise them with the terrain.
In a sense, he'd prepared for Messines for the whole of his professional life, both his military career and his engineering career. That desire to be methodical and to be organised and to command and control was exactly what he was suited for.
The Battle of Messines began at dawn on June 7th, 1917. By midday, it was all but won.
It was a strictly limited attack. What was called bite and hold, where you bite off what you can hold, what you can retain. And this is important for Monash because he sees how well it works. Messines is the biggest success that the British have had on the Western Front since the start of the war.
But Messines would also renew an old feud.
Monash is increasingly concerned that an Australian story gets told. He's unhappy with the way Charles Bean is telling it, and Bean has this desire to be fair and not to exaggerate for propaganda.
Bean's report on Messines is the apotheosis of banality. Not only is his language silly tosh, but his facts are, for the most part, quite wrong.
Monash has got an army's morale to maintain, and he wants its achievements to be extolled, even if they're not strictly true. So really, from the time that he has the capacity to promote his own story, that's something he does, and this builds the Anzac legend. Not the Anzac legend that Charles Bean wants to create, but the Anzac legend that John Monash does create.
The success at Messines was something that the British Commander-in-Chief, Field Marshal Haig, needed badly. His government had been deeply concerned about the appalling casualty rates going back to the Somme. Even enthusiastic supporters of the war, like Australian Prime Minister Billy Hughes, were complaining.
Field Marshal Haig, I'd like to introduce Mr. Keith Murdoch.
Things came to a head when Charles Bean brought a special emissary to meet Haig, Australian journalist Keith Murdoch.
The diggers feel that they've been let down on a number of occasions by the British Army.
Let down?
On a number of occasions. They want to run their own show. Mr. Hughes is very keen to combine all 5 divisions into one Australian corps under Australian leadership.
Mr. Hughes wants that, does he? Well, undoubtedly there are some capable Australian commanders. Monash, solid man. Great success at Messines.
With respect, sir, Monash is... he's Jewish. And as a race, they do tend to be pushy. It's their natural trait.
Bean didn't like Monash because he was Jewish. He had a pure view of how the commander should look, fair-haired, Anglo-Saxon. And they just didn't get on. Murdoch had a different motive. He didn't care whether he was a Jew, Gypsy or a Geranium. He couldn't manipulate him.
We look upon General White as the superior soldier.
White's a capable officer, no doubt. So perhaps you can explain to me why he commanded a division in battle.
General White was Chief of Staff and the brains behind the 1st Anzac Corps, the first troops to have left Australia. He had distinguished himself at Gallipoli, where he became a close friend of Charles Bean. While the British and Australians pondered the formation of an Australian corps, Haig remained desperate at Passchendaele. But after 3 months and 200,000 casualties, the battle to advance to the Belgian ports had gone nowhere. In early October, Monash's 3rd Division were the latest to be ordered in. But it began to rain heavily, turning the battleground into a quagmire. Monash appealed to his immediate superior, Lieutenant General Godley, for a delay until the weather cleared. Monash had clashed with him at Gallipoli, and, like a nightmare, those mistakes were coming back to haunt him. He was being forced to follow an order he knew was folly.
The whole place is a sea of mud. Waist bloody deep. Look!
Calm down, John. I've spoken to Haig, and he is convinced that if we keep up the pressure, we'll break through.
That's bull, Alex. The whole assault has to be delayed by at least 24 hours.
Not possible, John.
It's madness. It's bloody madness. It's a waste of lives.
Haig has made up his mind, and that's that.
Our men are being put into the hottest fighting and sacrificed in harebrained schemes, and there is no one in the war cabinet to raise a voice in protest.
The weather did not change. It poured right through. So he had this virtual quagmire that he had to go into. I think Monash knew that they were going to be absolutely slaughtered.
Things are bloody. Very bloody. We are bogged down in a sea of mud.
Australia lost 3,000 of the 5,000 that went out, and the New Zealanders lost 3,500. That's in a few hours' operation. It was an absolute disaster.
In Australia, the horrific casualties demolished enthusiasm for the war, just when the need for reinforcements was most urgent. As a passionate supporter of the war effort, Prime Minister Billy Hughes had already tried once to introduce conscription. Passchendaele forced him to try again. The second referendum was defeated by an even greater margin than the first.
The interesting thing, I think, of all of that is it's known that the majority of the soldiers who were fighting in France and in Belgium, in Palestine, voted against conscription. They didn't want to force others to do what they had voluntarily done but now realised the true horror of.
Meanwhile, Monash had gone to London on leave. The war had opened more than one new chapter in his life. His wife, Vic, had suggested he make contact with an old friend of the family, Lisette Bentwich.
And how is Vic?
I had a letter from her. She insists that you're not to choose presents for her, because your tastes are too...
Bohemian.
She wants to come over and join me.
And you don't think that's a good idea? Well, order her to stay home, for God's sake. I mean, I would have thought that was the point of all that rank. Getting and taking whatever you want.
Dear Vic, on the question of you both coming to England early next year, I'm sorry to say that I feel it is my duty to advise you very strongly against undertaking such a risky enterprise.
in November 1917, the Russian Revolution finally came to a head. Russia withdrew from the war, and the German High Command now had 1 million troops to transfer to the Western Front. On the 21st of March 1918, 47 German divisions launched the biggest attack of the war. After years of static trench warfare, they broke through, advancing 65 kilometres in 10 days, threatening to take Paris. The Germans were on the edge of winning World War I. A stunned British army urgently recalled every spare man to the front. Monash's 3rd Division, along with the 4th Australian Division, were ordered to defend the vital rail junction at Amiens, just 120 kilometres from Paris. After fierce fighting along the whole front, the German offensive was finally brought to a halt. The boldness of the breakthrough had shaken the Allies' confidence. The British government seriously considered sacking Haig, who grossly underestimated the size of the attack.
I want you to circulate the following order to all ranks.
Haig remained in place, but other commanders were less fortunate. As part of the changes that followed, Monash was appointed to command the Australian Corps. He was now a member of an elite group, one of only 17 corps commanders in the British Army.
My new command exceeds 166,000 troops. At long last, the army has an Australian as its commander-in-chief.
But Charles Bean was appalled by the decision and caught the next train to London to enlist Keith Murdoch in a plan to have the decision overturned.
Keith? Charles. So it's true. Birdie is leaving.
Yes. And he's taking White with him into the Fifth Army. That's not the worst of it. He's recommended Monash for command of the Corps.
But White's the best choice. Surely Birdie can see that.
White's wanting in ambition, unlike Monash, always thrusting, insinuating himself to the fore. He'll get there, Keith. The Jew will always get there. It's in their blood.
Perhaps that's the very quality needed to win the war, Charles.
You've got to think not of just two journalists. You've got to think of Keith Murdoch, at that time the agent for the Prime Minister, very powerful position representing the Australians. You've got the war historian with a lot of pull, that's Bean, writing for the Sydney Morning Herald. And they virtually formed a little cabal to try and stop this appointment. Although it had already been made, they were going to try and stop it.
You say the Jew's ambitious. Let's appeal to that. He's good at administration. So we work on Hughes, casually suggesting he promotes Monash to full general.
And base him in London, running the administrative side, leaving White to command the Corps.
I'll drop a rumour into one of my dispatches, something along the lines of sources in London, a brilliant move to enhance the Australian war effort.
The plotters were too late to stop Monash stepping into his new role, but their influence with Billy Hughes cast a shadow over his future. Brigadier General Thomas Blamey was promoted to become his Chief of Staff. They rapidly formed a close working relationship.
Popper. Murdoch and Ben are attacking my capacity to command this corps because of my race. We haven't got enough on our plate.
Prove them wrong, John. The King and the Chief will support you.
Monash had the power he'd always craved. Now he had to use it. He might not get a second chance. Monash proposed a battle to retake the village of Hamel. It was his chance to show how he thought the war should be fought.
I'd formed the theory that the true role of the infantry was not to wither away under merciless machine gun fire, nor to impale itself on hostile bayonets, but to advance under the maximum protection of mechanical resources.
Monash wanted to combine tanks, artillery, aircraft and infantry in a way that had never been done before. But the infantry, to a man, shuddered at the thought of tanks. Mechanical beasts invented only a few years before.
I've always found that it pays to consider the psychology, not merely of the enemy, but also of my own troops. It's because we don't consider psychology enough that we're taking so long to win this war.
The genius of Monash at Hamel was to get the Australian infantry to work again with tanks. Remember, at Bulcourt, they'd been mangled by the failure of the British tanks, and the Australians really had an enormous concern that the tanks would fail them again. And so Monash allowed them to train with the tanks for weeks before the Battle of Hamel, so that the infantry could see what the tanks were capable of doing.
The effect on the spirit of the men was remarkable. The digger took the tank to his heart and gave each one a pet name.
But just as he was in a position to prove himself, Prime Minister Billy Hughes landed on his doorstep. Monash was ready for a fight.
Prime Minister, these criticisms we've undoubtedly heard about my taking command of the Corps...
Let's talk about that later on.
No. I'm honour bound to inform you that any arrangement that would involve my removal as the commander of this corps would be highly distasteful to me. I will not be degraded and humiliated.
You may thoroughly rely on your concerns receiving the greatest possible consideration.
Prime Minister, I will not voluntarily forego this command.
Hughes questioned the Australians about their new commander. He soon realised that Monash had more support than Murdoch had led him to believe.
I haven't met a single one of them who thinks as you do. They all say the same thing. You tell me there are men who think the other way. You say they want white. Where are they? Give me their names.
But it still wasn't smooth sailing for Monash. He had been allocated 2,000 raw American soldiers for the battle, but General Pershing objected to them fighting under a foreign commander and wanted to withdraw them. Monash's boss, General Rawlinson, brought the bad news.
Henry, you know as well as I do that an order followed by a countermanding order results in disorder.
John, the chief has decided no American troops are to be used. We have no choice but to obey.
But it's too late to carry out his order. The battle will go ahead with the Americans involved, or the battle will not go ahead at all.
You can't disobey the chief.
But you can.
Disobey an order? Me?
Yes. As an army commander, it's open to you to disobey and issue a new order if new information comes to light.
So you want me to run the risk of being sent back home for disobeying an order for you?
Yes, I do. Surely it's more important to preserve the confidence the Americans and the Australians have in each other than to preserve one army commander.
Well, you're right, technically. I can countermand an order, providing the Commander-in-Chief isn't available for reference.
Well, is he available? Here, now?
No.
I rest my case.
Monash's skill as an advocate had come to the fore. The battle went ahead, including the Americans.
The morning of July the 4th was ushered in with a heavy ground mist. The tanks suddenly emerged out of the fog, striking terror into the German soldiers. A perfect modern battle plan is like nothing so much as a score for an orchestral composition, where the various arms and units are the instruments, and the tasks they perform are their respective musical phrases. Each unit must make its entry precisely at the proper moment and play its phrase in the general harmony. Coloured smoke bombs confused the Germans into thinking that they were under mustard gas attack. Planes were used to drop ammunition to the infantry as they advanced below. Never before did we have such immediate and reliable information about the conduct of the battle. Observers in planes marked the positions of the German strongpoints on the maps, which were dropped and collected, then rushed to our command centre. No battle within my previous experience passed off so smoothly, so exactly to timetable, or was so free of any kind of hitch. It was over in 93 minutes. It was the perfection of teamwork.
For the Australians, the effect of Hamel was electric, especially in the depressed times following the devastating German offensive.
Message here from Billy Hughes. My personal congratulations on the brilliant success of the battle. I'm sure the achievement will have the most considerable military and political effect upon the Allies and will heighten the morale of all Imperial forces.
Changed his tune, has he?
We'll see.
Flushed with success, Monash pushed his superiors for a major assault to roll back the Germans from their newly won positions. What he didn't know was that the Allied High Command had already been planning a counterattack since well before Hamel.
I took every opportunity of pressing my views upon Rawlinson for an immediate, sustained offensive.
Any specifics?
All right, then. Reduce my front from 3 divisions to 2. Return the 1st Division from Flanders so the Australians are together. Give me the Canadians to protect our southern flank. And give me some more tanks. Lots of tanks. 500 between us all would be adequate.
How about 100 debutantes and 1,000 cases of champagne as well?
Wouldn't say no.
I'll see what I can do.
The wily Rawlinson let Monash think he was the instigator, so he would convince Billy Hughes to keep the Australians involved. He knew Hughes was very worried about the Australians being overused as frontline troops. Oblivious to this intrigue, Monash went to London for a break.
A 30-minute discussion about strategy with Haig the other day. I couldn't understand a word the man said. The man's a fossil. No understanding of modern warfare.
Thought after your triumph at Hamel, you were feeling more confident about it all.
Hamel was small beer.
Anyway, enough of all that. Your current mission is to relax for a few days. With me.
If it goes wrong, thousands of men could die. It has to be meticulously planned.
John, one man can only do so much. That's why you have subordinates. I mean, they may even do it better without you peering over their shoulder.
No use having a dog and barking yourself.
Exactly. Now you're going to enjoy your leave. We're going to see a new play tomorrow night. It's called The Naughty Husband. Oh, sorry. I mean, The Naughty Wife.
I received a coded message to return to the front. I requested a destroyer to meet me at Dover and transport me across the Channel. The battle was about to begin.
The Battle of Amiens was the largest battle Monash had taken part in to date. As part of Rawlinson's Fourth Army of nearly 500,000 men, the Australian and Canadian Corps would spearhead the Allied counter-offensive to drive the Germans back from their devastating breakthrough that nearly reached Paris.
All movement of troops and transport of all descriptions took place during the hours of darkness. Over 600 guns were at battle positions, as well as 10,000 tons of ammunition. 0 hour was fixed for 20 minutes past 4 on the morning of August the 8th. In that first huge volley, 400 German guns were put out of action by the pinpoint accuracy of the artillery. By 8 p.m. that night, 8,000 prisoners had been taken, 173 guns captured, and hundreds of vehicles. A hole had been driven on the width of nearly 12 miles right through the German defence and blotted out at one blow the whole of the military resources which it contained. We sustained only 1% casualties. The tanks and artillery had protected the infantry very well again.
The victory at a major turning point in the war. The Allies had taken back control. Monash and the Australians had been in the forefront.
It's profoundly important because on the German side, it breaks the Germans' will to victory. Ludendorff says of the 8th of August that it was the black day of the German army. And really from then on, Germans who looked at the war objectively knew that they weren't going to win.
Success at Amiens was a huge relief to Haig. After the disaster of Passchendaele, his Prime Minister had cut off the supply of reinforcements and was waiting for a chance to sack him. Amiens had saved Haig's reputation.
It's come. It's really come.
What's come, Mother?
This, from Lady Hode, addressed to Lady Monash. Then I opened the Argus and saw Sir John Monash.
Lady Monash.
I feel like I'm dreaming.
But it wasn't a dream. On August the 12th, the king himself arrived to invest Monash with his knighthood. The showmen in Monash revelled in the occasion. It was a day of theatre. But when the show was over, Monash knew what he wanted to do next. Mont Saint-Quentin overlooked the city fortress of Péronne. If taken, the way was open for the Allies to attack the Germans' last line of defence, the massive Hindenburg Line. And if that fell, the war was all but over.
So you're going to take Mont Saint-Quentin with only 3 battalions? So how presumptuous, I would have thought.
Depends how quickly we put plans into action.
Well, I wish you luck.
Thank you. Oh, and before you go, one more thing.
Only one?
I would like to lodge a formal complaint about the lack of coverage Australian forces are receiving in the British press.
I'm not sure I follow you, John.
You are suppressing information about our achievements, and I resent it. Now, my men are by nature and instinct sportsmen. If you score a century at Lord's, you ought to see it up on the scoreboard, don't you?
The day you beat us at Lord's, I'll run naked down Whitehall. I'll talk to the chief, see what I can do.
As nearly all his tanks had been put out of action, Monash would have to rely more than ever on the courage and daring of the Australian infantry. He was expecting a tough encounter and was quite prepared to push his troops hard to win it.
The battle began at 5 a.m. During the operation to capture Mont Saint-Quentin, the 23rd Battalion was held up by several enemy machine gun posts.
The taking of Mont Saint-Quentin is a different sort of battle than any the Australians had fought. It's a freewheeling, fluid battle. And this is something that Monash also proves to be good at. It turns out that he doesn't just win methodical set-piece advances. He can also make rapid decisions, change plan and direction, and still come out on top.
I was compelled to harden my heart. It was imperative to recognise a great opportunity and seize it unflinchingly. Casualties no longer mattered. Few prisoners were taken because it was bayonet work all the way, and the field was strewn all over with enemy dead.
Some units went into this battle not having had any sleep, fighting continuously for 72 hours. One of Monash's divisional commanders, General Hobbs, protested that his men were too exhausted to continue, but Monash knew that one more push and victory would be theirs, and the justification for that is in the outcome of the tremendous success.
3 Victoria Crosses were won that day on the slopes of...
Rawlinson, Henry, we're on top of Mont Saint-Quentin.
It's a beautiful view. Pull the other one.
If you don't believe me, come and see for yourself.
I'll be damned. If it's true, John, you've just altered the course of the war.
My complaints about the publicity the Australian troops are receiving seems to have had a remarkable effect. The capture of Mont Saint-Quentin is reported all over in the British press as the greatest single feat of arms of the whole war.
But the personal war between Monash and Hughes was getting worse. There had been 50,000 Australian casualties over the last 6 months, and Billy Hughes was deeply concerned about it. Monash believed that only by keeping up the pressure could the war be brought to an end. He was prepared to push himself and his men to the brink.
But I've been talking to the diggers in London, John. They're saying that if this frenetic pace continues, there won't be any of them left to fight on. I want the AIF to cease all fighting by October.
Well, they've certainly done their fair share. And no one would like to see them out of the front line more than myself. But I'm a soldier, and I'm under orders.
You're in command of the Australians, aren't you?
Yes, but Field Marshal Haig is in command.
I don't give a tinker's cuss about all that. I am the Prime Minister of Australia, and this is a direct command from me.
Well, I'll speak to Haig.
You're not listening, John. You are a great soldier, no doubt about it. But if I choose to have you removed from your command tomorrow, I can do it. I want our troops out. Their welfare is my first priority.
Hughes, without consulting Monash, gives a furlough, leave, to 1914 men. So the most experienced, often the most senior men in the battalions are pulled out at the last minute and sent home, which is great for them because they survived the war. But it weakens Monash's force at its last critical battle.
Diggers had been pushed too far. Monash was now facing an open revolt. The War Office insisted on disbanding some understrength battalions to bolster others. Men were being taken away from their mates, and they hated the idea.
I'm facing a mutiny, Henry. The Australians are not conscripts, they're volunteers. It's that want-to-be-in-it spirit that gives them the edge over the Germans.
I know, but we have to face the fact...
The other reason they're so good at fighting is loyalty to their mates. So what do the bean counters at the War Office do? Scatter them to other battalions, separate them from their mates. It's lunacy. All I want is another fortnight to strike a decisive blow at the enemy. No man wants to desert a victorious army.
A fortnight.
Monash knew the Australians had only one more battle left in them. All the terrible years of war had come down to this Hindenburg Line. 70 kilometres of concrete bunkers, machine gun posts and barbed wire. It was the last and greatest line of German defence. If the Allies could break through, the Germans were broken. Rawlinson's Fourth Army was given the job of making the main assault. Monash and the Australian Corps would play the central role. Haig gave Monash 50,000 American troops for this crucial strike. But he overestimated their ability, and his usual meticulous planning began to unravel. The inexperienced American soldiers quickly ran into difficulties. Monash refused to believe reports that his plan wasn't working. He was becoming increasingly rattled. The exhausted but battle-hardened diggers had to go forward to cover for the Americans. And with a brilliant British advance on their flank, the Australians cracked the Hindenburg Line, one concrete pillbox at a time. Victory was won, but at a cost.
For myself, I'm very heartily sick of the whole war business. Its horror, its ghastly inefficiency, cruelty and misery have always appalled me.
When Rawlinson arrived to congratulate Monash, he found him close to breaking point.
Congratulations, John. Brilliant job. The Germans are well and truly on the run.
I'm in a bush, Henry. So am I.
Yes, it's time for you and your men to have a good spell.
They've earned it. We all have.
I know, John.
You know, sometimes I venture to hope that this is the last serious work I ever do in my life.
I doubt that, John. I really do.
The exhausted Australian divisions were ordered out of the front line. As only 5% of the Allied fighting force, they had punched well above their weight. They had fought the main enemy on the main front and earned their place on the world stage. On the 11th of November 1918, the German government signed the armistice. After 4 terrible years and 20 million dead, the war was finally over. When Monash arrived in England, he was feted all over London. Social decorum meant Lisette couldn't attend.
It was a royal banquet. I want to know everything that happened, down to the dullest detail. I'm going to have to drag it out of you, am I?
Mm-hmm.
Very well. Who are you seated next to?
Rudyard Kipling. I got his autograph. And sitting opposite was Winston Churchill. Kipling amused him with stories about me that he'd heard from diggers on leave.
And the king?
I had 5 minutes with the king and over 10 minutes with the queen.
And what about that dreary son of theirs?
The Prince of Wales to you, you wicked woman. Oh, yes, I had a long conversation with him.
Really? What did he say?
He said, oh, rather, oh.
I wish I could have been there.
So do I.
With the war over, 200,000 troops needed to be repatriated back to Australia. Billy Hughes was considering Monash for the job. Surprisingly, Charles Bean, the man who opposed Monash from the very beginning, now became his advocate.
It's the kind of thing he would excel at.
Oh, he's capable enough. I'm just concerned he'll turn it into the Monash show again.
6 months ago I would have agreed with you, but having worked closely with him, I'm afraid I may have misjudged the man.
The Monash show it became. He introduced a visionary scheme to occupy the men while they waited for transport back to Australia. It was called non-military employment, but was soon dubbed by the diggers as non-military enjoyment.
People would take themselves off to dairy farms because they knew they were coming back to a soldier settlement block and they needed to know how these things worked. People took themselves to all sorts of skills training. He was saying, what do you want? Find the opportunities, find the learning that is going to make you a better person when you get back home, and go there and do it.
Monash had fought hard to have his men's achievements recognised. Now he wrote his own account of the war.
Monash becomes the symbol of the AIF. Because it was a national force, he was its commander at the moment of victory, and Monash becomes the embodiment of the AIF spirit. And he helps us along himself because he writes the Australian Victories in France, a book that he dashes off in a month. It sells 10,000 copies in Australia, but it's also serialised in the newspapers. And everybody reads not Charles Bean's version of the war, but John Monash's version of the war.
Vic and Bertha were about to arrive in London. Monash's relationship with Lisette needed to be resolved.
Divorce. Divorce is just not something I can entertain. There's a question of my position, my responsibilities, not to mention my sense of loyalty.
Loyalty?
To Vic.
Of course, how could I forget? And what about your loyalty to me, John, your ally? Am I just to be cast aside?
No, of course not.
Well, that's what it looks like.
4 days later, Vic and Bertha arrived. Vic knew her husband had seen Lisette occasionally, but she assumed they were friends and nothing more. Monash, Vic and Bertha arrived back in Australia on Boxing Day 1919. And although Prime Minister Billy Hughes was conspicuous by his absence, the family was swamped with well-wishers. But Monash's life back home would be far from easy. The family soon faced tragedy. Vic's cancer had returned. She died on the 27th of February, 1920. In the lonely months of mourning that followed, Monash began writing to Lisette.
Been meaning to have a talk with you. I'd like
Lizette to come and live with us here at Iona.
Why on earth would she want to live here?
She and I became quite close when I was in London.
Yes, I know.
I know this is difficult for you.
No! No!
Despite Bertha's attitude, Lizette arrived in late September 1920. She discreetly took up residence at the Grand Hotel. By the standards of the day, it was an unconventional relationship. Some say it was the reason Monash was never offered a high public position, such as Governor-General. But he was offered the job of running the State Electricity Commission in Victoria. It suited his engineering background and gave him the chance to find jobs for former soldiers as the recession that swept through the 1920s began to bite.
Australia's a nation of 5 million people, and it's got 2,000 traumatised war veterans in its population. So it's a nation that's got profound, and one of Monash's roles is to help to heal those wounds. So Monash's role really is almost greater after the war than it was during the war as the symbol of the AIF.
Monash's last campaign would be for a memorial to the 60,000 diggers who failed to return. But Australians were deeply fatigued by everything to do with the war, and the government was reluctant to approve Monash's recommended design for a shrine. His old enemy, newspaperman Keith Murdoch, dissumed of gloom, proposing a city square instead. And he had a lot of support. Monash was down, but not out. On the eve of Anzac Day 1927, he made his move, using the only artillery he had, passion and words.
The shrine design is a beautiful concept. Dignified, noble, and appealing. Eminently suited as a memorial to great service and sacrifice, without that ridiculous note of triumph and conquest which characterizes the memorials of the barbarian past. It is not a design for a tourist attraction, nor is it even to beautify the city. It is a memorial to the diggers. And that alone.
The next morning, 600,000 people gathered for Anzac Day. War weariness had seen the day nearly wither and die. Now it was back with a vengeance. The diggers would have their memorial.
I think the Anzac legend as we know it started at Gallipoli. Let's face it, in terms of the contribution to the war, Gallipoli was a sideshow. The war was decided in 1918 and the Australians were centre stage in that decision. Their contribution was enormous. That's Monash's legacy, and of course the legacy of the Australian Corps. And it's also an important part of the Anzac legend because it gives the Anzac legend substance. The trouble is that today we tend to overlook that and are captivated by Gallipoli.
When we think about war, we think about ordinary blokes doing extraordinary things. We don't think about leadership, we don't think about creativity, we don't think about genius. Yet Monash was all of those and more.
In fact, now, John Monash is all but forgotten. But without him, there may not be an Anzac Day at all.